Thank you, Jenkins. Yeah, you can serve evening supper around 9, I think, my good man. I didn't notice you there. Many of you probably wondering about my lifestyle, my incredulous and yet irresistibly compelling baller lifestyle. You see, it's all made possible by the Skrilla. Yes, indeed. Skrilla is an integral part of the equation. Now, that is good. That is good. Excellent vintage. Acquiring Skrilla. That's the starting place for all would-be ballers, or pimp motherfuckers, as some of them prefer to be called. The kind of men whose intentions move the world, whose actions shake the globe upon which you ants exist. You see, we buy and sell people like yourself, sometimes for fun, sometimes for sport, sometimes for business, and business ultimately comes down to the Skrilla again. Anyway, I've said enough for now. alphadraft.com. Figure it out for yourself, or don't. Be ruled by others. Very good. It's actually just get red. Now, Luminosity winning MLG Columbus is obviously going to be considered one of the all-time great runs because they won a major, and there obviously had only been 8 majors, and they were one of 7 different lineups to win a major, being as we've only ever had one lineup repeat, which was Fnatic from Katowice 2015 to Cologne 2015. They were also the first non-European team to ever win a major, and indeed the first non-European team to even make the final of a major, because no North Americans had managed it before. Brazil used to be, with Luminosity, just making round of 8s, and Asia has never been a factor of the majors thus far. Now, teams like Na'Vi, this incredible lineup they still have now, which goes from like April 2015 and has won many tournaments. Astralis has won many tournaments. These lineups have never won a major, and yet these teams have won many more tournaments with their lineups than Luminosity has. This was the first big international tournament Luminosity had ever won. Now, when you look at the context of this run at the major, yes, it was fantastic. It was a great run. But we have to need to look at all the different aspects of who they played, where they played, and what happened elsewhere in the tournament to understand the context of how they came to win. So starting at the group stage, first of all, they ended up getting an insanely easy group. Now, NIP as a roster wasn't insanely easy in terms of like some scrub team, but you have to consider they were the number 1 seed because they finished top 4 at Cluj-Napoca many months prior. So of the teams that finished top 4, you had the likes of Na'Vi, you had even Envious admittedly in poor form now, the champions of the last major, and obviously the team that's now FaZe, formerly G2, which would have been quite worse. So of those teams, I'd say NiP overall, you could have made a reasonable case they were the second best because of how much Envious was slumping, and obviously FaZe isn't much of a factor nowadays. But when you consider Luminosity could have drawn Na'Vi here, now that would have been a very difficult scenario there for your group, because obviously Navi's a fantastically strong team, and now maybe they could have beaten them in the best of 1, but maybe Navi would have beaten them, who knows. And so as a result, they might have been coming out of the group in second place. Instead, part of the reason they got to come out in first place is because by getting an IP, a team already that's weaker than Navi, then they got an NIP that couldn't use Pit, which obviously had nothing to do with Luminosity. They had no choice in it, and they can't fly Pit in themselves and play him, so they had to play against a team that was using their coach, and as a result became much easier than the other number 1 seeds in all the other groups in that respect. So nice group draw initially, and as a result Luminosity was coming out clear number 1s. They did come out number 1, and as a result they got to go off and have what ended up being the easy side of the bracket. Now, if they'd have come out second in their group, so maybe NIP had Pit and NIP had been able to upset them, now they would have potentially been playing Na'Vi in the quarterfinals, since that's who NIP, who came second in this group, did play. And obviously Na'Vi in the quarterfinals is very hard, just as it was in the final, even if on the second map it turned out to be very easy. So who knows what happens at that point in time when you've seen less of them in the tournament, and it's not as much pressure as well in the quarterfinals, as Astralis showed us against Fnatic. Now, once you get past the group, consider that their first opponent was Virtus.pro. Now, I think Virtus.pro is still a good team, but they're not an elite level team like they used to be. They're slumping to a degree, and yet Virtus.pro still gave Na'Vi overall, I'd say, the best series of anyone. Now, yeah, Team Liquid was close to beating them on both maps. Na'Vi was very close on the first map, but overall, Virtus.pro really gave them the business over both maps and really pushed this team and forced them to win on maps that aren't their strongest maps. So that was a really good series. But also you have to point out that this shows that Luminosity's run wasn't dominant, because against Virtus.pro they really did have their work cut out, and they had to really step their level up above and beyond what was a good level put out by Virtus.pro over the maps. Then you go to the semi-finals, Team Liquid. Now, this is obviously, of the 4 teams that made the semi-finals, the easiest possible opponent of the semi-finals. Because remember, on the other side of the bracket, you have Astralis, fantastically talented, just smashed Fnatic, and you have Na'Vi, incredible team, who makes the final of pretty much every tournament nowadays, almost for a laugh, and had been beating the likes of Luminosity in the past. So when you consider all those opponents, getting Team Liquid is the dream matchup. You've got a fantastic chance to get to the final there. Yet, what happened? They ended up having Team Liquid push them really close both times. So again, it wasn't dominant to win out 2-0 there, because both maps you were facing map point and not series point. You faced map point on both maps though, and then you won in overtime. So props, shows a lot of resilience, but it's not a dominant win. There's also the factor that how did you get Team Liquid in the first place? Well, first of all, they had a big upset in a very close game against Fnatic, so they got that, which is also a factor of Olofmeister not being there. You have to admit, in terms of his full strength, there was a depleted Olofmeister there. So in a world where Fnatic is at full strength, you probably don't get to play Team Liquid at this point in the tournament because they would have gone out second in the group, most likely, as far as we can imagine. Instead, they managed to come out first in the group. Then on top of that, they managed to draw CLG. So in this particular world, rather than them playing someone like Fnatic or whoever else, I mean, I can't remember the way the group would have gone, maybe we were doing Virtus.pro instead. They got to play CLG, therefore you got Team Liquid in the semis. That's the key point, that you played them in the semis. So an easy possible semi-opponent, and it was still close. Now you have to consider that for the tournament, there was no Guardian, there was no Olofmeister. Now if there had been a Guardian, in terms of, we're talking about full strength, like, yes, Guardian, a player was in the server with the name Guardian, a player was in the server with the name Olofmeister. Those 2 players did not look like the world-beating, all-time great, best player in the world stars that they were at tournaments previously and for the few months before, back when those teams used to beat Luminosity. So realistically, those players weren't there. Now, there were some versions of them there who at times could have some good runs. In the case of Guardian, he had some maps that were decent. Not a great tournament overall, and Olofmeister really was off his game. You could see he really was in big trouble. And his team really fell apart without him, whereas at least Guardian's team, Na'Vi, could be good enough to still make the final. Remember, the only teams really that were beating Luminosity in best of 3s were Na'Vi and Fnatic at full strength. So you didn't get to play Na'Vi and Fnatic at full strength. They essentially weren't at this tournament with full strength, and you won the tournament. So as a result, again, it's not that you overcame everything in your past to win the tournament. You just did all that you could, and you beat the people before you, and you put up the most consistent high-level performance, and you won the tournament. Okay, but it wasn't a dominant win in that sense as well. It's not like they beat out everyone and thrashed them. This wasn't some Virtus.pro EMS1 Katowice 2014 run of like, oh my god, the level of dominance is insane here. It wasn't really that sort of a run. And it's notable that the 2 best players in the world, as well as the 2 best teams in the world losing their best players, but the 2 best individual players in the world essentially both had injuries and weren't at full strength at this tournament. Then you got to consider that maybe Fnatic still could have been an interesting matchup in the final, or we would have seen them in the final. Couldn't find out though, because Astralis played to all the maximum of their strengths and thrashed Fnatic, but then Astralis did what Astralis do and choke in the semi. Therefore, we never got to see what might have happened if Fnatic had made there. So one of the favourites for the tournaments was removed before the semis even began. Now, those are all the context as to what happened from a critical side to bring down the hype of it being like the best run ever, if anyone would claim such. Most people wouldn't, but I know there'll be some fanboys will. Now, some points to make out that are positives for Luminosity, but that also put it in context, is coldzera had his best tournament ever. This was his first truly superstar tournament. Not just star player, not just very good performance, not just good performance even in losses. This was like superstar, best player in the world type shit from this guy. And so this is the first time we've ever seen that happen from this guy. He's never done it at any other tournaments. He's been very good at other tournaments. He's been stable at other tournaments. He's had big performances map to map at other tournaments, but he's never been a monster like this from beginning to end, from pillar to post, and been the MVP of a tournament of this level. But he was able to do so here. So obviously, while that's good and it makes the tournament very special, we haven't seen that since either, when he went to DreamHack Malmo, and so we don't know if he'll ever be able to do that again, which is important for the context of Luminosity going forwards. Likewise, Luminosity showed excellent proficiency on Cash and Cobble at this tournament. Now, they'd had some okay results on Cobble in the past, but Cash and Cobble are in the bottom 3 maps of theirs, along with Dust 2, which is their permaban. Those are the maps that, in theory, you want to get them onto. You are going to beat them on if you're top elite level teams, and so as a result, them getting wins on those maps was very significant. But again, as we saw at DreamHack Malmo, where they had some problems on some of those maps, particularly Cash, now we're in a scenario where you can't just rely that you're going to be able to get wins on those. So again, very good for that one tournament, but will it work going forward to Luminosity? That's still very much up in the air, as teams like Tyloo were able to show us in that particular tournament. Then you've got to consider the overall context, adding in all these factors. So it was a very special run. That had lots of great play and amazing moments to win. Excellent. The team in general performed at a slightly higher level than we've seen before. They were still a very good team before that, one of the best in the world. But aside from the Team Liquid series, which is obviously a flaw that they let the opponent get to the map point each time, I think overall we saw a higher level from this team. And they almost relished the chance that some of these opponents they were playing were weaker, and this was their chance to go to a final and win, and they took full advantage of that, so props to them for that. coldzera, as I mentioned, played above and beyond the level we've seen so far. If you can hit that again in the future, then they can be the best team in the world. But we haven't seen that yet. We've only seen it one tournament, so we still need to have that proved a bit more. They got a little bit of luck of the draw on their side of the bracket, and then how it played out on the other side. So the top three teams on the other side, obviously because Nip was with the coach, was obviously Fnatic, Na'Vi, Astralis. So Astralis took care of Na'Vi for you, and then Na'Vi took care of Astralis in as much as Astralis choked, and then Na'Vi was a little bit underpowered themselves. So really it's almost the best way it could have played out for you in that scenario. So they got a little bit of luck in that sense, or good fortune, however you want to describe it. Their run is not as strong when you consider all the other 7 lineups that won in history of the Fnatic team that won back-to-back. The ones that won Katowice 2015 and Cologne 2015. Those were stronger ones overall when you consider the level of opponents those teams beat, basically nearly all the best teams in the world, and the situations they had to win from, and some of the amazing at times dominant performances and huge superstar performances that were reliable, and which players carried the tournaments. Those seem like a higher level. Likewise, I think the LDLC DreamHack winner 2014 and Envious DreamHack Cluj-Napoca 2015 could be said to be better. The Envious one's a little bit more debatable because obviously Envious had a lot of their strong opponents eliminated for them because the guys from TSM choked. Na'Vi got to arrive at the final but weren't quite the Na'Vi that we know now. Flamey hadn't kicked into gear properly, and Virtus.pro never got to play them because they lost to G2 in that crazy upset in the quarterfinals. But that Envious team did beat Fnatic, to be fair, which was the reigning two-time champions. So that's bigger, I think, overall than what the guys from Luminosity were able to do by beating out Na'Vi, who had a depleted Guardian. I do think that ultimately this is a better run than the first ever major champions, Fnatic 2013, because really, yeah, they beat Nip in the final. That was big time stuff. But Nip wasn't the best team at the time, hadn't won tournaments in a little while, and Very Games was actually the best team at the time. And they had a very easy run through the bracket, famously, partly because of upsets in the group stage. Now, I will say that one run that is certainly better than is got to be Nip winning ESL 1 Cologne 2014, because to me that is one of the biggest fluke runs of all time. Yes, the Fnatic one's a big fluke, but this one is particularly problematic in as much as they had the random map draw was picking Cobblestone that people hadn't played before. They were winning it 16-14 in all these instances, and then the Fnatic team that they met in the final hadn't won a big tournament yet and looked like they crumbled from the pressure overall. So if we consider the 7 other runs, well, the 8 other runs, because obviously 7 champions, but 8 other runs, then we'll put this in the middle, because we'll say that 4 runs were better than it, 3 runs are worse, and this one goes in at whatever, number 5. And so, still a pretty good run overall. Not the best run in history though, but still a fantastic team.